Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Grow Where You're Planted. On this episode of Grow Where You're Planted, we are inviting you to join other citizen scientists as they participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count. The GBBC is co-hosted by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and Bird Canada. Over this 4-day weekend event, bird watchers of all ages count birds to create a real-time snapshot of bird populations. Participants can count birds for as little as 15 minutes or as long as they wish on one or more days of the 4-day event and report their sightings online at birdcount.org. Anyone can take part in the Great Backyard Bird Count, from beginning bird watchers to experts, and you can participate from your backyard or anywhere in the world. Now, what you're seeing now are videos that I shot in my backyard of birds that are feeding. Here we have a lady cardinal, and they like to flock with the other small brownish birds. They do this as a way of protecting themselves from predators like hawks. And I do have a hawk that does come around from time to time. So that is a really good survival strategy that they have, to mingle with the other rufous or brownish, tannish colored birds. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Grow Where You're Planted. And I think I have an activity that is good for staying home, and that is the Great Backyard Bird Count, or the GBBC. And hopefully by now, many of you have set up your feeding stations where you've been watching your birds for entertainment. And so now you can participate this weekend and add to the knowledge of what's happening with bird populations around the world. The scientists at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and Bird Canada welcome the observations of citizen scientists because they themselves can't be everywhere. And this is a global event. So people will be reporting from all over the globe on what's happening. It's very exciting. And so let's look at what it means to be a citizen scientist. And we're going to start actually by asking, what is science? Science is where you observe, especially in nature, observe what's going on, you record it, and then you research and you share. What is science? Well, you satisfy your curiosity, you solve mysteries, and you ask the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, or how. In this case, we're talking about the Great Backyard Bird Count. Who is everyone? What is the bird count? When? February 12th through 15th. And where? In your own backyard. Everybody uses science, whether you're a reporter, law enforcement, a doctor, artist. And when you do a bird count, you don't have to be an expert. You can be someone who just like casually looks at birds, or you might be a hardcore person who really likes to record everything. And like I said before, scientists and researchers can't possibly collect all the information on their own. So they're relying on people observing what's happening in their own backyards. Very exciting times we live in. This event takes place every President's Day weekend in February. And once you do your count, you're going to enter those results online, and we will post the websites at the end of the program. Anyone can take part in this, in the GBBC, from, like I said, from babies and toddlers, being involved with their families. You can be a beginner, an expert. And when you go to the website, they are going to give you apps that you can download on your phone if that's how you like to do things. Or you can get the instructions online and record from your laptop. And they will give you detailed instructions on how to take notes, how to count up all of this. This is exciting. Recently, more than 160,000 participants submitted their bird observations online, creating the largest instantaneous snapshot ever. That's pretty exciting when you think about it, folks, that even though you're just one person, or maybe your family is just one family unit counting for those 15 minutes, but that's being added to people all over the globe reporting at the same time so that they can see the distribution of birds, how many birds there are. Very important information that they can glean from these reportings. Now, I've answered the who, the what, the where, the when, and a little bit about the how, but why do we count the birds? And that is because those bird counts are used as one way of seeing what's happening with global change, global climate change. Because what's happening with the birds and the other living creatures is impacted by what's happening with the climate. So it's kind of like the canary in the mine shaft, but we're talking about all birds and how they actually are impacted by the climate. So let's look at this. Why do we do a bird count? It's because we have declining bird populations, and they are subject to a number of things, one of them being when they migrate. Many of the birds migrate from the southern up to the northern hemisphere, and also when they're migrating at night, they're affected by tall skyscrapers with their lights on. That blinds them. Also, loss of habitat. We're seeing how the wildlife is starting to invade into our neighborhoods because they're losing their territory. Also, sterile yards with grass and toxins that are put on them. And here we have phenology. Phenology is nature's, it's how biology is impacted by the environment. And the three factors that they look at are temperature, daylight, and precipitation. Those three things impact the natural world. And what happens now in the case of birds that are migrating come up, they time their trips so that they arrive when the insects and the spiders are available to feed their fledglings. So even if you have birds that are seed eaters, fruit eaters, most birds feed their babies a protein source, insects or spiders or worms or grubs. And what happens is that normally when the flowers and the plants are coming into season, the insects that feed on them come at the same time. And forever, the birds have timed their arrival, their mating, their egg laying, and then the hatching of the babies to synchronize with those insects and spiders so that they have a very abundant food source for the kinds of insects and spiders that their babies will be fed. But what's happening with climate change, and anyone who spends time outside can tell you this, that they've observed over a number of years, that sometimes those flowers get out of sync. They're blooming earlier or they're blooming later. If we have a cold snap like we had last year in April, that can impact when the flowers bloom, when the fruits are produced, and that impacts the insects. So say the flowers bloom earlier, the insects aren't ready yet. And so there's going to be less insects, which means less food for the birds. And when that happens, there's a decline in populations. So the number of birds that we're seeing is a good indication of what's actually happening with the climate and how the phenology or the timing in nature is lining up. That's one reason why we study how many birds with the bird count. Now, when you're going to participate in a bird count, they're going to want to have an idea what kind of birds you are looking at. And most people know common birds like robins and blue jays, cardinals, that kind of thing. But even within species or families, there's subtleties like sparrows. There's a number of different types of sparrows, and some of them might have like stripes on their heads, different shapes of plumage or coloring. And so you might want to have a field guide to be able to identify them. And I said that even small children can be bird watchers. So from the time a toddler or a very small child looks up and they recognize that, oh, look, there's this creature and he has these feathery things and he's got a beak and all that. And they go, bird. Yes, that's the start of being a bird watcher. And you, as a grown-up, as a parent, a grandparent, can say, yes, that's a bird. It's red. It's a cardinal. This bird is red and it's a cardinal. And you start to expand that child's vocabulary. Now, being in a library, we have resources that you can check out for kids on birds that can help them to identify. Or if you're buying presents, you might want to, let's buy a book about birds, something simple. And even small children who like books can go, I can look through here. Oh, look at here. And then as you're reading it, you can point things out. You can go, oh, yes, look at this is a woodpecker. And it has this beak. And so you start to build on their knowledge of different birds, which incidentally helps us to build our own knowledge. Now, that said, we are going to look at some of the ways that you can start to identify birds. So here's bird taxonomy. First thing is GISS, general impression of the size and shape. Also look at their plumage, how they move, where they're located, and of course the bird's song. Here you see an example of two different types of sparrows. Notice the different markings. And then, of course, one of the distinguishing features is beaks and bills. Here we have little finch, and you notice these vice type of pincher beaks that they have. They're designed to crush seeds, along with the chickadees, other sparrows, and the juncos. They have a specific type of beak that's designed for seeds, and the small seeds like the Niger seed. Then if you go over to the wetlands, you're going to see blue herons and egrets, and you're going to notice they have those long beaks that are good for stabbing fish in the water, so they're meat eaters, along with the seagulls. And then when you see your Canada geese and your ducks, of course, they eat plants and small little fish and insects in the water. And here's a red-winged blackbird. You can recognize his song in the spring, and a mourning dove, again, recognizing the mourning dove's cooing. So you study their beaks, and you can see what kind of food they would consume. The jays and the cardinals also have those types of beaks that are good for crushing seeds and pecking into things like the peanut shells. And here we have a wild turkey. He's got one of those little beaks that's good for pecking around. Here's one of the nuisance birds, a starling, and a grackle, which is a beautiful bird, but terrible disposition. The shape of the beak determines a bird's diet. So if you want to encourage a variety of birds, you're going to want to offer a variety of food. You can get mealy worms. They're dried mealy worms. Those are good for some of your protein eaters, like your robins. You've got your suet you can put out, and variety of seeds. You could cut up an orange, slices of orange, and put that out there, and they'll peck away at that. So, giving them a variety of food, but keep in mind that different birds have different food requirements. Now, we're going to look at a different beak here in a minute. It's really important to encourage diversity in your yard. One of the birds that is really important is a woodpecker. It's called a cornerstone species, and it's important for other birds because they peck away at a tree and they make a hollow for their nest. And when they abandon it the next year, smaller birds come and use those for their nesting also. Now, there are about 500 species of woodpeckers worldwide, and in Michigan we have 8 of them. And I'm really happy to tell you that I've got 4 that come and visit in my yard. And we're going to look at their beaks right now. And this first one is the red-bellied woodpecker. Notice his torpedo-shaped body and the long pointy beak that is great for pounding and knocking holes into things. And they have a beautiful disposition, fun little bird. And this is a hairy woodpecker. Notice the red on top of his head. That means he's the male of the species. They're about 8 inches long. This is the female. See her little whiskers, her hairy whiskers. Now, this is where GISS comes in handy, because sometimes you have a similar looking bird. This is the downy woodpecker. Looks very much like the hairy, but notice he's got a shorter beak, and he's only about 6 inches tall. And same with the others. The red is the male, and without the red on the back would be a female. This is a flicker. And flickers, you see the torpedo body and the long beak, and they stay on the ground to eat insects, and this one's eating ants out of the cracks between my patio bricks. So once again, there we go. Woodpeckers checking out a hole. He's the red-bellied one, and they're very important. You want to make sure that you don't hurt the woodpeckers. They are protected. So if you have a woodpecker that, like a little downy woodpecker that's pecking on your house, there's ways that you can discourage them, but you don't want to hurt them. Now, what's really fun, it's nice to have bird feeders in the winter to support the birds that stay here, but it's even better if you encourage birds all year long and start to add them to the ecology of your backyard. And there's 4 different elements here that you want to incorporate for wild. And that would be water, food, nesting, and shelter. Water is the most important. Even if you put out a bird bath or a little saucer of water, or if you can install a pond, you can see they bathe in it, they drink it. And also the idea of planting plants that are food, like grasses. I have 2 mulberry trees that are very popular with the birds all summer. Now with nesting, birdhouses are good, but you also want to make sure that they have a source for twigs and straw, maybe put out some string and ribbons, and of course providing shelter. And you see our little fawn there that was hiding in that wood pile. I almost didn't see it. It was very exciting. Now, the other thing about having wood piles, small wood piles and brush piles, is because insects collect in there. And where there's insects, there's spiders. And this is a great way for birds to get their source of food also. Now, a couple of summers ago, my birdhouse was set up near the brush pile, and the little house wren started to, they built their little nest inside the birdhouse, and then they only had to travel about 3 feet over to the wood pile, and that's how they went back and forth, back and forth. Didn't have to expend much energy flying anywhere else. So those are 4 ways that you can start to encourage birds and other wildlife in your yard. I hope you have enjoyed this program tonight. And if you are so inspired to participate this weekend, starting at midnight tonight and ending on Monday, to participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count, you have till March 11th to submit all of your findings, but it's only for this 4-day weekend. So now, in closing, I want to encourage everybody to stay safe at home and to grow where you're planted.